Hello and welcome to the Criticaleye Asia podcast, inspiring leaders to succeed. These podcasts engaging on subjects at the forefront of business leaders' minds, always topical, thought-provoking, and enabling you to learn from leaders and peers delivering amazing results, unpacking leadership and making it bite-sizable. We're here to explore stepping up, and I feel very fortunate today to be exploring this subject with Ian Stone, who is a Portfolio Non-Executive Director, or INED. He sits on the board of Tencent and does other things outside as well to fulfill that full portfolio, and is a Criticaleye board mentor. Ian, love you to be able to introduce yourself briefly.
Well, thank you very much for the invite, Charlie. I'm very honoured. So myself, you've introduced it a little there, but I've been in, most of my career has been telecom and tech. And for the last 34 years, I've lived in Hong Kong. Been on a few boards in that time. I'm currently, as you mentioned, on Tencent, but also advisor to 2 or 3 other boards, particularly in the region, South Asia, and also the Middle East.
Ian, let's explore your observations on stepping up to a group CEO role and advice you would give to anyone who is taking on this great opportunity. Where would you like to be able to start?
Okay. Well, in my career, I've experienced the stepping up as a CEO, stepping in as a CEO, and also supporting CEOs from the board and as an INED. And perhaps if I just relate back a bit to an early experience of mine, some time ago now, but my first head of division MD role, and I was thrown in from London headquarters to Hong Kong, which happened to be the jewel of the crown, of course. Part of a restructure and a shake-up. This was the early 1990s. Everything was being shaken up in telecom at the time. But I arrived in a rather, let's say, hostile environment. They didn't want the shake-up at all. Lucky enough to find a couple of very experienced mentors helped me navigate through what could have been potentially a few disasters. That was for an initial 2 years, and I'm still there after 34 years. So I guess there are 3 main themes I think we're going to go through that I've identified. And certainly as a newly installed CEO, whether stepping up or from the outside, I'd suggest to develop a walk and listen approach to the organization. To focus on the basics that are important to people as well as to the company itself, and as well as, of course, to your shareholders. In my instance, then, I was able to fix a few easy things that related well to staff early on, more difficult things, but maybe over time. And I guess I learned also show that you're listening. What I found was maybe more than they'd had before. It was important to, I guess, become involved. And so back in that first MD role, I discovered that karaoke was a big thing in Hong Kong at the time, regarded as a norm for all, which in my case was, we all regretted. Actually, not just me, but everybody listening. But again, it's just one of the, I guess, the things that normally in London, not so much, but in this, and particularly in a new role, was quite important for establishing contact. So back to the few easy things. Sometimes a well-established company will become rather oblivious to its bureaucracy and an unnecessary process. And I found that was the case back in telecoms. There was a lot to change. Actually, there still is, but that's another story. Long established and outmoded systems or rules, and often they're just not listened to from above. And if you can provide that listening, then it does change people's attitudes somewhat. So show that you care, prepared to address basic issues as well as address the big picture, of course, as expected of the CEO. And then, of course, I guess in parallel, but often it follows, to get to know your board beyond the boardroom, and not just in the boardroom, which tends to maybe be a bit, or was a bit of a norm, and find out what they really care about, not just within the company, but what affects them. Establish the relationships. Even more important now, I think, in times of intense and fast change, we've really got to, it's a criticality to move quickly, but establish those relationships. So that was, I guess, my first early learning in that role.
Quick one. In terms of how you now see it, is the INED able to undertake that same sort of getting close to and to be able to walk and listen?
Yes and no. Yes with your board, yes with your senior managers. Within the organizations, not normally. What you can do is find other ways to do it. So in my case, then I will spend a fair bit of time introducing business opportunities maybe, or contacts. And I can observe how they're followed up. I can link in with people that do follow up. I get to know managers around the businesses, and increasingly they're international. So it's helpful that I am as well. And in that way, you can see more. But you have to make that bit of extra effort.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go on to the second observation you've got in about stepping up or stepping in, someone who's taking up a regional CE role. What are your observations of what can be a very useful response to this new environment they're finding themselves in?
Yes, and I guess many different aspects that could be brought to answer that. But I guess as your company grows, or the company that you move into has some size and development, then M&A is often part of the strategy. And in my case, then two of the companies I'm on the board of very prolific in the M&A scene. And I guess what I've discovered from the way they operate, maybe some little advice from the board, but generally driven by the management, is in developing the team or business, and as a theme for expanding the business by M&A, then to look for partnering rather than controlling.
Okay. And what do you mean by that?
It's a preference to work with the existing key personnel, founders, the existing CEOs, investors, shareholders that have obviously some interest in how things are being developed, rather than to buy them out or moving them on. Eventually you may move some on, but what you tend to find is they know their business, and you don't necessarily, but to certainly avoid your business needing to be good at everything.
Got you.
And it avoids throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah. And would you say there's anything there for the CEO to really focus on in order to make that a success, a great success? And what are some of the benefits that come as a result of bringing those people in and nurturing them, I suppose, to some extent?
I think certainly the CEO can look inside for talent, know their business, but generally you probably have to have alongside you a key strategy manager, somebody who is also capable of negotiating, following through, and basically completing the direction that you as a CEO and that your board want to go in. This approach, in my experience, is often favored by and founder-owned businesses, which are prevalent in Hong Kong, actually not just Hong Kong, but this region. There is usually an increased empathy between founders, naturally, when they're looking at businesses, particularly when they're new businesses and startups. And in fact, an increased tendency to promote from within with these companies, particularly if they've grown from the beginning of businesses. Part of that is to perpetuate the founding or the family principles. which are, again, quite important for this region. And as I've mentioned, then this means that in the business itself, you don't have to be good at everything. It's good to be able to analyze other things and bring new things in that perhaps initiate some change. With maintaining the partnership approach, then it tends to protect and grow what is invariably the DNA of the team or the business that you're addressing. I think quite important. There may well be a need to challenge the thinking, especially if you're just taking on teams. And it's more likely that they'll listen to challenges and understand what you're saying if it's from a basis of trust in your view, or even demands. In the long term, then that approach tends to enhance your company's reputation, because as a company and people you can work with, and within your marketplace or your business as a person or company, then it helps have that, positive vibe in the market. When you're approached by this company, then you'll be receptive. And by the way, be sure to use the partner investees or peers for placing your own employees on their boards as observers or as active directors, and with a remit of value-add input and also to learn and bring learnings back into the company. And I think that's something that companies in this region do particularly well.
Ian, another perspective, delighted to capture this from you. The role of the group CEO is a challenging one, and therefore there's a third perspective that I think is interesting that you've highlighted, the use of internal audit. Great if you could expand on that and what it brings to this person, and particularly anyone who's new to the role, understanding how they might engage and utilize them for good effect.
Yes, certainly. First, if I were choosing the CEO, I'd have some background in this anyway. But I would see it as not just useful, but essential. And the bigger the company is, the more essential that the CEO has access to how things work in the company, maybe how they really work. So it's important to be able to verify what your business is doing, what it's up to. And particularly if, of course, you're new to the business, but at any stage. And confirm your teams or your business units or group work with an established internal auditing function. So in my experience, quite critical for coming in, and especially for directors. Now, as a director, I would say that, particularly as an independent director, so you're not anything much to do with the day-to-day running of the business, then it's your only way of seeing into the business that is independent of management reports or management advice. And that way, then you can reach into the back office, you can reach into the front line, the consumer space, the tech. You have to be able to understand how that company's really working. And in my experience, there are two parts. One is internal control, and that is establishing how things work within the company and how the management wants it to work. And that goes applying principles, ethics, the basic rules, the regulations, and then internal audit, which is independent internal team, which audits how the teams are working against those rules and regulations, or if there are no rules and regulations, how they actually work and whether there should be some in place. And now in a certain part of the growth of a company, because obviously small companies cannot take a large overhead, then you need to decide when your senior team can no longer rely on that walk and listen approach or department report, even on customer feedback. And it's important to have that established process, check and balance, regular auditing. In each of my CEO roles, I've worked closely with internal audit functions led by relatively strong characters. They have to be to remain independent. And as an independent director, of course, even more so. It needs to be independently reporting, so to the audit committee or to whoever on the board is responsible, separately from the CEO, but very, very closely with the senior team and have the full support of the senior team. And as I said, it's the only way a director can view or monitor what goes on within the company, especially as it grows.
Whilst we're covering internal audit, and it makes sense, I think, for anyone to appreciate the role of the committees and how they can be a very useful function. And indeed, it might be a developed function that they build out to provide reporting to them as a CEO.
Yes, indeed. And my experience are critical to the running of the company. At senior level is the committees, as opposed, dare I say, at the board. So much more that will be discussed, but they also have specific responsibilities, whether it's governance, which nowadays tends to cover ESG, whether it's audit, which also covers risk, and various nominations, remuneration. Then this is where directors can really get involved and ask every question. No time limit. You can ask for further information before you actually get to the board. You can also address subjects that might be sensitive to raise at the board, and certainly maybe give some notice of what they may be, or receive some inside information which might be useful to you.
Ian, thank you so very much indeed. 3 really interesting perspectives you brought to the subject of stepping up as a regional CEO. We've looked at the importance of walking and listening. We explored the art of partnering. Finally, looked at how one might utilize the internal audit function to bring in unique insights and perspectives, and also briefly mention the role of the committees and how useful they are. So thank you so very much indeed, Ian, for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Charlie.